Hi, welcome to my channel. This is my first ever video on this channel. I've decided to split out all of my reviews onto a separate channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Now this is my first ever classic novel that I have read. I have not read the classics and I feel awful. As a bookworm, I read so much. I read most days. I have been reading since I physically could read, and I cannot believe I've not read a classic before. I'm actually disappointed in myself. In light of the new movie starring Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi coming out, I've decided to read Wuthering Heights, and this is what I think of it. So I'm going to jump in with a couple of disclaimers. Obviously, because I've never read a classic, I am not used to the oldie-woldy English, and I struggled to get into it. It took me several chapters to understand what on earth was going on. I had no idea what they were saying or what they were doing. So if some of my comments seem a bit out and they don't make sense, and if I've not picked up the story properly, it is definitely because of my ignorance, because of my lack of understanding the language used. This book was written in the 1800s, so it's very historically different to what I'm used to reading. I'm used to reading fantasy books with dragons in, dystopian books, you know, stuff set in now, so it's really different for me. So I do apologize if, yeah, what I talk about is incorrect or wrong. I also just want to do a special mention on this actual copy. This one I picked up at HomeSense for £3. It was brand new, still in cellophane, and it's got sprayed edges, which I think are really cool. That's obviously the Wuthering Heights building, then the moon and the sprayed, and it comes with a ribbon, which I found very handy because I don't really have many bookmarks. I don't really use bookmarks. I usually fold the corners of my book, which is awful. But with an edition like this, I didn't want to do that, so the ribbon was great. It's also got, oh, let's just bend the pages. It's also got a really fun design in the cover, and it is a really nice edition of this book. So overall, let's just do a big roundup of my opinion, because I won't lie, I hated this book. And I think it's because of the historic difference, what I'm used to reading now, and just the lack of understanding what was going on. I went into this book thinking it was going to be a very romantic, greatest love story of all time. Now I won't lie, again, it's because of my ignorance to this book that I thought that, because I watched the movie trailer and it's labelled as the greatest story of all time, and it's got wonderful costumes, wonderful cinematics. Margot Robbie is the main character. I love her as an actress. Jacob Elordi, again, he's been in some good films. I love watching them both. So I've gone into this imagining it's going to be very romantic, and oh my goodness, was I wrong. I was so incredibly wrong about this book. This book is full of insufferable, ghastly characters, and there is not an ounce of love in this book, I don't think. Obviously, because it's an older book, there is a lot more hidden meanings and deeper connections and emotions and things you probably need to think about a bit more rather than the actual story, which for me is hard work. Did I enjoy this book? No, not at all. Would I recommend this book? Absolutely 100%. The reason why I would recommend this book is because it is a historic education, and I feel so dumb for having not read any of these types of books before. So I have learned quite a lot reading this book. I've learned to understand the English language. They use different words that you don't see very often in this day and age. You understand a bit more about how life was there. Emily Bronte wrote this in the 1800s. She only lived to like 30 years old, and it gives you a little bit about the author at the start. So there's so much history with this book. She was born in Yorkshire, so it's obviously set where she lives, and I do love the setting of this book. It's in the Yorkshire moors, it's very gritty, it's very countryside, it's very dark and cold, kind of like the lighting I've got going on at the moment because it's about to rain and we're deep in winter. But it is very much a English northern gritty book, and I did like that aspect of it. So for that reason, I would recommend reading this book, because it just opens your eyes a little bit more to English literature and history. It's insane how old this book is, so it's really interesting to read. I didn't enjoy it because the storyline was quite mundane, although for the time that it was written, it was outrageous. Written in the perspective of Catherine's maid, called Ellen, but she gets called Nellie, and she's Mrs. Dean, and she is talking to a tenant of someone that lives at one of the buildings in Wuthering Heights and explaining the story. Now, I think these two characters are like us looking into the family as well. So we're getting the perspective. I mean, these two characters are quite pleasant, they're quite nice, they're quite normal, and I think we're obviously supposed to be pleasant and nice and normal, and looking into this family and thinking, oh my goodness, they are horrible. It starts off in a building, Wuthering Heights, and this is the house set in the Yorkshire Moors, and it follows Mr. Earnshaw, who is the dad, and then his two children. He then goes off on a work trip or like some sort of trip to London and comes back with an orphan child called Heathcliff. Now, they are initially a bit confused as to why this person has come into their life. The two kids seem very bratty, I won't lie, but I think because their father was quite nice, he just made them bratty. He didn't teach them very well and they became horrible people. Now, he then gets poorly and dies, and the brother, Mr. Earnshaw, then becomes the master of the house and then doesn't treat Heathcliff very nicely. Now, I thought this book was going to be all about the love story between Cathy and Heathcliff, but we don't actually see much about the story between them two, and I don't think, because obviously it's the perspective of Nellie, so she's only talking about the things she's seen and she's witnessed, but I find that takes away from the love of the story and the emotions. We don't get to feel what the characters are feeling because we're not hearing it and seeing it from their perspective, which I found was lacking. I wanted to see how Cathy feels and how Heathcliff feels with their mental like thoughts, which is what you seem to get with a lot of books. But anyway, they then have a little bit of a love story. They grow up together, they're friends, they're a bit naughty together, they kind of, you know, they go running around the moors and they kind of cause mischief, and they then stumble across another kind of neighbouring family where Cathy gets stuck at the house. She then gets to know the two children, the Lintons, Isabella, and I don't remember the name of the Master Linton, but we'll call him that. And she kind of gets taught a few manners. She is quite bratty and quite rude, and then she learns to be a little bit more of a lady. She then comes back, bit more of a lady. Heathcliff doesn't quite relate to that, and she then falls out with Heathcliff massively. Now, this happens in the first like quarter of the book. She then kind of also proclaims that she loves Heathcliff, but they don't seem to spend much time together. He seems to like run off and we don't get much from them, so I can't understand why she's in love with him, and again I can't understand why he's in love with her because she's bratty and not very nice. She then decides to marry Mr. or Master Linton, and then Heathcliff is really upset with that. She then goes off and lives with Mr. Linton, and then Heathcliff kind of wants to get back at her and then marries Master Linton's sister called Isabella. Now, Cathy kind of teases, and there's a bit of a tension around Cathy teasing Heathcliff about Isabella fancying him, and he gets grumpy and nasty, and he then decides to like fall out but then marry Isabella despite that. So I don't know whether Heathcliff hates Cathy and that's why he wants to get at her, or he's so jealous because he loves her so much, but at the same sense, that doesn't explain why he's nasty to Isabella because she just likes him and fancies him. Because it's written in Old English, I was really confused about what was happening, because when Cathy, she kind of protests, I think, about Heathcliff and decides to starve herself. She's ghastly to Mr. Linton and her husband. She's not very nice to him, and I don't know why he puts up with her. He seems like a really lovely guy and a really lovely husband. Anyway, she kind of gets annoyed with Heathcliff and then protests and starves herself. And then, it's a bit blurry because I didn't really understand what was going on. But then she then gives birth. Now, I thought it was actually flashing back to when her mother gave birth to her, but it was actually she giving birth to her daughter. I didn't realise she was pregnant. It just got confused in the translation. So she then dies, and this is halfway through the book. Having her and Heathcliff mainly just hated each other for the book. One of her sentences was, there's a very famous sentence that she says at the start, which is a very famous quote with, "Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same," something like that. Now, that was the only portrayal of love I think she ever had for him. And then she had another quote when she was starving herself, basically saying, "I will haunt you till when I die, I will haunt you until you die," or something like that. So anyway, she gives birth, and then her daughter is called Cathy. So that's where I got confused, because I thought we were talking about the original Cathy and her mum dying, but it wasn't a flashback. She was giving birth to her daughter, now called Cathy, and she died. Now, she kind of lived with her father Mr. Linton, and then Heathcliff had obviously got Isabella pregnant, but she then ran off because he treated her so badly. Again, I don't understand why, because Isabella was only ever nice to Heathcliff and only ever loved him, and if he was getting with her to get to Cathy, I don't understand why he'd want to hate Isabella, because that would surely look better for Cathy than if he loved her. Regardless, confusing, but she ran off and had a kid that was Heathcliff's. She then dies, and Mini Heathcliff, so I'm just going to call them Mini Cathy and Mini Heathcliff, comes back to, we're not quite at Wuthering Heights, we're at like, I think it's like Thurlestone Grange or something. He comes to live with Mr. Linton and Mini Cathy. Heathcliff then finds out and demands that he wants his son. I've also missed a character here. So we've got Hindley, which is a younger, I think it's Cathy's youngest brother. So Hindley is like, he stays at Wuthering Heights, he becomes a bit of a renegade, and he's like the youngest sibling. No, he's Cathy's nephew. And I think that just makes, I don't know, I think that makes him Mini Cathy's cousin. It gets a bit confusing because they use the same surnames, and that's where I get baffled. Anyway, so Mini Heathcliff comes to live in Thurlestone Grange with Cathy, and yeah, Heathcliff finds out and then decides that he wants him over there. And this poor Mini Heathcliff, he comes, he's a bit sickly, and then he starts off being like a nice character, and then when he goes to Wuthering Heights, he becomes insufferable. Heathcliff then like formulates a plan to get Cathy to marry Mini Heathcliff. So when that Mr. Linton dies and they're married, Heathcliff, Mr. Heathcliff, the big bad main one, then gets the whole asset and the whole kind of manor and the grounds and all the lands and the assets. So there's kind of a bit of sniding going on. Cathy kind of falls in love with Mini Heathcliff, which is kind of gross because they're cousins, and this is why I don't understand. Obviously this is again the historic barrier, because that's incest and that's gross, and also he's horrible to her and she's kind of horrible to him. Again, it's like a similar reoccurring relationship, and again I don't get why, and it makes you think these characters are just horrible. They're just horrible to each other. Why do they put up with just such nasty behavior? Like, get on and live your life. Why are you falling in love with your nasty cousin? It's so bizarre, but I get why this is like outrageous back in the day, because yeah, that must just be outrageous behavior, and to be honest with you, getting with your cousin is outrageous behaviour today. So then Cathy and Mini Heathcliff marry, Mr. Linton dies, Cathy gets stuck, then Mini Heathcliff dies because he was also sick. Mini Cathy is then stuck with Big Heathcliff. Big Heathcliff then decides to starve himself, which I think is a bit ironic and a little bit like why Cathy was doing it, he's now doing the same. Ultimately dies, and I think he kind of kills himself off, but it's a bit confusing and a bit unclear with the whole language barrier. Now at the start of the book, the tenant and Nellie obviously are talking to each other, and this is why how the story is being told. But the tenant stumbles across Cathy's room and he kind of sees a ghost, and I think basically ultimately what happens is Cathy did haunt Heathcliff. Once she died, she then haunted him, and that's why he was horrible, and then basically told him he should kill himself and be with her. But I don't know if that's open to interpretation or if that's actually happened. So that's kind of the overall overarching story, which to me is a bit mundane. It's messy, it's incestuous, and I get why it's outrageous, but kind of in a whole book, I mean, I guess it's quite a lot that happens in a book, but it happens quite fast paced, but it's mundane. Like, no one is murdered, there's no fantasy, obviously, there's nothing different, like it's all very realistic, and it's very like, that definitely could have easily happened, which is not the kind of book I like to read. I like to read murder mystery, I like to understand something that's a bit different. So when you're reading it, it's like, oh, this is a bit mundane and nothing much going on. But I did love the kind of scenery building and the scenery kind of descriptions, the seasons, like you really do feel like the nitty-gritty mores of it. And this is why I think I'm gonna love the movie, because I think the movie just adds a bit of pizzazz. I'm very keen to watch it. I think I've seen a couple of Margot's costumes and they look incredible, and I do think that it's going to be completely historically wrong. They're adding a bit of camp and colour and pizzazz to what otherwise is quite a mundane, nitty-gritty book. So I'm very excited for the movie. So obviously it's a very interesting story. I don't massively love the characters because we're obviously getting it from Nellie's perspective. We don't get many of the characters' emotions. Nellie does seem a bit emotionless. She seems quite boring. She's happy to be walked over, she's happy to just put up with it. She seems to do it for the love of her mistresses, so Kathy original and then Kathy mini, but they're nasty to her, so I don't get why she does it. And I think maybe she must have just been getting a really good salary. No, but genuinely I think it's just the way that world works. If you're a maid, you kind of just live with the family, grow to love the family and understand it. Another special mention to the character Joseph. He was like a gnarly groundskeeper. I didn't have a clue what he was saying the whole book. I literally didn't understand what he was saying. It's supposed to be like very rough Yorkshire accent, and I don't even think some of the characters are supposed to know what he's saying. But yeah, I literally haven't got a fuggy, so I might have missed very key parts of the book because I didn't know what was going on. Overall, would I recommend reading this book? Absolutely, 100%. Although I didn't necessarily enjoy it and the whole book was a real slog to get through. Every time I reached for it, I was like, ugh, I'm gonna have to sit through an hour or so of this. I think I've been so educated by reading this book of the Old English, the historic factor, and just the way different people write. Definitely made me very grateful for the way we live today. We don't have to faff around with heating, like fires to keep warm, although actually we don't turn our central heating on, we only heat the place by log fires, so I can kind of relate. But we're not dying of sickness at 30 years old very often. This book goes to show how small life is. These people didn't go on holiday, they didn't have fancy restaurants or cars or fast fashion. They got very sick, life was hard, life was mundane, and they died early. So it's made me very, very appreciative of what we live now. We're living a very luxurious, fast-paced, indulgent lifestyle. So it's really good to read and put into perspective where we are today versus where they were back in the day. And for this to be outrageous back in the day, it's such an insight into what it's like in the 1800s. As someone who doesn't particularly like history, I hated it at school, I didn't pay attention. As I'm getting older, I'm becoming more and more fascinated by it because there is quite a lot to tell of the way they lived back in the 1800s. You know, they appreciated more, they lived a slower life. Obviously they didn't live as long, and marriage wasn't necessarily for love, and it's just really interesting, the comparison, and it's good to put your life into perspective and think, actually, life is not that bad. It's really, really not that bad. So I'd 100% recommend reading it, but I didn't enjoy it. I won't be reading it again, but I don't reread books anyway, so that's nothing major. I probably won't keep this book, I'll probably end up selling it on. I just feel like this is such a beautiful copy, it deserves to go to someone who's gonna really appreciate it and love the book. I just feel like it would be wasted on me, it would sit in the cupboard, it would look cute, but it would just be a book in my cupboard. So I'd rather sell it on and give it a better home. Very glad I read it. It took me about a month to read. It was my first read of 2026, so I'm very excited to be getting back into my fantasy books, read about elves and kind of dragons and things like that. Overall, I am gonna give it 2 stars out of 5 because it's not a 5-star read for me. It's not a 1 because I've learnt a lot and it is really, really, really interesting to read, but it's not a 5 because I didn't absolutely love it. But let me know your thoughts. Obviously, this book has some very big fans, so if you are one of them, please let me know why you love this book in the comments. Or if you're like me and you've not read a book like this before and you've read it for the first time and you hate it, let me know. We'll follow up on this video once I've watched the movie because I think it'll be really interesting to compare the two and talk about the differences, whether I liked the movie. I do feel like I'm going to like the movie a lot more than the book, and I'm going to sit in that kind of ratio of people. But let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for getting this far on the video. Hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed, and if you want to hear more reviews from me, whether it be from movies, books, food, beauty, you name it, I'm gonna review it, then hit the subscribe and I will see you on my next one. Bye!